The moment Ethan Carter closed the black folder inside his grandfather's old workshop, something inside him changed forever. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't fear either. It was something colder, sharper, like the world he thought he understood had just been turned slightly off balance. He sat there for a long time in silence, the dusty air pressing around him, the wooden walls holding memories of a man who had built everything from nothing. Grandpa Arthur hadn't just left him documents. He had left him a truth that someone had tried very hard to hide. Ethan slowly stood up, his hand still holding the edge of the workbench. His mind replayed every conversation from the past few days. His father's voice, Daniel's confidence, the polite smiles had always felt slightly forced. Now he saw them differently, not as family, but as players protecting a system that was starting to crack outside. The wind moved through the empty fields. The ranch felt different tonight, like it was watching him back. Ethan placed the folder inside his jacket and walked out. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he didn't go back to the city. Instead, he drove straight to a small office building on the edge of Dallas, where an old friend of Grandpa Arthur still worked as a legal consultant. The man's name was Harold Vance, a quiet, sharp-eyed man in his late 60s who had helped draft half the Calloway family's early contracts. When Harold saw Ethan walk in, he didn't smile. He just nodded once. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Harold said. Ethan sat down. He already knew. Harold opened his drawer slowly and pulled out a thick file. "Your grandfather visited me 6 months before he passed," he said. "He asked me to prepare for something complicated." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What kind of complicated?" Harold slid the file across the table, the kind where families stop being families. Ethan opened it. Inside were financial summaries, ownership structures, and internal audit notes that matched what he had found in the workshop, but deeper, more detailed, damaging in ways that weren't immediately visible. Harold watched his reaction carefully. "Arthur suspected your father was letting Daniel move too freely inside the company," he said. "But suspicion isn't proof." Ethan flipped another page. "Flips is proof." Harold nodded slowly. "That's why Arthur changed everything." Ethan closed the file slightly. "Why me?" Harold didn't hesitate. "Because you were the only one who didn't ask what was in it for you." That sentence hit harder than expected. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Outside, his cars passed on the street like nothing in the world had shifted. But inside him, everything had. "So what now?" Ethan asked. Harold exhaled slowly. "Now they react." As if the timing had been waiting for that exact moment. Ethan's phone, vibrated. Unknown number. He answered. A familiar voice came through. His father, calm, controlled, but sharper than before. "We need to talk," his father said. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Harold. Harold gave a small warning glance. Ethan stood up. "I'm listening." A pause. "Not over the phone," his father replied. "Come to the estate." Ethan looked at the folder in front of him. Then at Harold. Harold spoke quietly. "This is where they stop asking politely." Ethan ended the call, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the son returning home. He felt like something was being summoned. When Ethan arrived at the Calloway estate that evening, the gates opened slower than usual, like even the house itself was uncertain. Inside, the atmosphere was different. No dinner setup, no casual family presence, just silence. Daniel was already in the main office when Ethan walked in. His suit was perfect, as always, but his expression, WASN single quotes T. Father stood near the window, hands behind his back, staring outside like he was thinking 3 steps ahead of a game only he understood. "Sit," Father said. Father said. Ethan didn't move. "I prefer standing." Daniel sighed. "Start this." Ethan looked at him calmly. "I didn't start anything." Father turned around slowly. "We've reviewed the documents from the trust." Ethan waited, and he asked. Father stepped closer. "And we believe there are errors in interpretation." Ethan almost smiled. "Errors?" Daniel cut in quickly. "You don't understand what you're holding." "These documents, I understand them perfectly," Ethan interrupted. Silence. That was new. Daniel wasn't used to being interrupted. Father's tone hardened slightly. "You've involved external parties." Ethan nodded once. "Harold Vance." Daniel's face tightened. He went to him. Ethan looked at him directly. "You worked with Grandpa. I wanted clarity." Father stepped forward. "This is not clarity. This is escalation." Ethan's voice stayed calm. No, it's exposure. That word shifted the room. Daniel laughed, but it didn't sound confident. You think you can challenge the structure alone? Ethan turned slightly toward him. I'm not alone. Father narrowed his eyes. Who else? Ethan didn't answer, because the truth was simple. It wasn't about who stood with him. It was about what was already set in motion without them noticing. Father walked closer now, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake, Ethan. For a moment, Ethan saw something familiar in his father's expression. Not anger, fear hiding behind. Control, but not for Ethan. For the system he built his identity on. Ethan spoke slowly. Grandpa didn't make mistakes. That sentence landed heavier than anything else in the room. Daniel stepped forward. You really think he trusted you over us? Ethan met his eyes. I don't think it. He paused. I know it. The silence after that was different, not empty, loaded. Father turned away briefly, as if recalculating something internally. Then he spoke again. We can resolve this internally. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. Meaning what? Daniel answered quickly. Transfer oversight of the trust. Keep things within the family. No external interference. Ethan nodded slowly. So you want control back? Father corrected him sharply. We want stability. Ethan looked at both of them for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. Stability doesn't require silence. That was the moment the tone changed completely. Father's voice dropped. Be careful. Ethan didn't flinch. Or what? Daniel looked between them, tension rising. Father answered carefully. You're stepping into things you don't fully understand. Ethan took one step forward now. Then explain it. A pause. Father didn't, because he couldn't, not without revealing too much. Instead, he changed direction. You think this is about inheritance? Father said. It isn't. Ethan replied immediately. Then what is it about? Father looked directly at him. Power structures don't survive unpredictability. That sentence confirmed everything Ethan already suspected. This wasn't just about money. It was about control of something bigger, something protected, something carefully maintained. And Grandpa Arthur had decided Ethan was the only one who wouldn't preserve it blindly. Ethan exhaled slowly. I guess we'll see how stable it really is. Then he turned and walked out of the room. No one stopped him, but as he left, he could feel it. The shift had already begun, and whatever came next was the war. No longer a family disagreement. It was a breakdown in something far more dangerous. Ethan didn't go back home after leaving the estate. Instead, he drove through the quiet outskirts of Dallas, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind moving faster than the road ahead. The conversation with his father kept replaying in fragments. Not the words themselves, but the pauses between them. Those pauses always revealed more than the sentences ever did. You're stepping into things you don't fully understand. That line stayed with him the most, because it wasn't a warning. It was confirmation. Something existed beneath the surface of the Calloway Empire that even his father wasn't fully willing to speak about out loud. Ethan pulled into a small roadside motel just outside the city. Nothing fancy, no security cameras at the entrance, no staff asking questions. Just a place where people disappeared for a while when they needed space to think. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened his laptop. Harold Vance had sent him encrypted files earlier. That evening, Ethan hesitated for a moment before opening them. Inside were transaction logs, offshore accounts, and internal shipping contracts tied to Calloway Freight Holdings. But what caught his attention wasn't the money, it was the patent. Certain routes were consistently overvalued. Certain suppliers always approved without review. Certain consulting firms appeared repeatedly across unrelated projects. Ethan leaned closer. Something about it felt too coordinated to be random. A system, not mistakes. He took a slow breath and kept digging. Hours passed. At some point, the motel room light shifted from warm yellow to pale gray morning. Ethan didn't notice, because by the time the sun began rising, he had found something that made everything else fall into place. A single internal memo buried under layers of archived documents. It wasn't signed by Daniel. It wasn't signed by his father. It was signed by a name Ethan didn't recognize, but the authorization chain beneath it traced directly back to senior executive control, and every approval path led through Daniel's division. Ethan closed the laptop slowly. Now, it wasn't just suspicion, it was structured. Daniel wasn't acting alone. He was operating inside something already built, something protected. And the more Ethan looked, the more he realized why Grandpa Arthur had kept certain things separate. Not everything inside a family business is meant to be shared equally. Some parts are designed to stay hidden. Ethan stood up and walked to the window. Outside, trucks passed on the highway carrying freight under the same company name his grandfather had built decades ago from nothing. Callaway Freight Holdings, a legacy built on trust, or what used to look like trust. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Rebecca. "You answered, Ethan," she said quickly. "You need to be careful." He stayed silent. "I heard Dad called an emergency internal review meeting," she continued. "Daniel's pushing for a formal challenge against Grandpa's amendment." Ethan exhaled slowly. "On what grounds?" Rebecca hesitated. "Capasso. Concerns." That made him pause. "They're trying to question Grandpa's mental state at the time of the amendment." Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the phone. "That won't hold," he said. "It doesn't have to hold legally," Rebecca replied. "It just has to create delay." And that was the real strategy. Not winning, delaying, disrupting, breaking. Momentum before truth had time to settle. Ethan looked out the window again. "They're scared," he said quietly. Rebecca didn't respond immediately. Then she said something unexpected. "Not just scared of you." That caught his attention. "What do you mean?" A pause. Then Rebecca lowered her voice. "I think they're scared of what Grandpa left behind." Ethan didn't answer, because he already knew she was right. The inheritance wasn't just money or land. It was information. And information inside powerful families is never just information. It's leverage. That evening, Ethan drove back toward the city. But instead of going home, he stopped at a small secure archive facility Harold had arranged. Access to inside, under controlled lighting. He reviewed physical copies of older company records, paper documents, signed contracts, original filings, things that digital systems often clean up or bury. And there it was again, the same pattern. But this time, Ethan noticed something new. A recurring, external partner linked to multiple consulting transactions. A name that appeared too often to be coincidence. Blackridge Advisory Group. Ethan wrote it down, then cross-checked it. What he found made him sit back slowly. Blackridge wasn't a normal consultancy. It was a financial restructuring entity, used in multiple corporate disputes across different industries. Companies that worked with them often underwent sudden leadership changes, or asset redistributions, or silent takeovers disguised as internal restructuring. Ethan stared at the name for a long time, then whispered to himself, "So this is it." A soft knock came at the archive door. Harold stepped inside. "You found it," Harold said quietly. Ethan didn't look away from the documents. "This isn't just about Callaway Freight." Harold nodded slowly. "No." Ethan turned toward him. "How deep does it go?" Harold hesitated for the first time since Ethan met him, but then he spoke carefully. "Deep enough that Arthur stopped trusting the people closest to him." Ethan felt a shift inside his chest. Even Dad. Harold didn't answer directly, but he didn't deny it either. That silence was enough. Ethan closed the file gently. "So Grandpa didn't just leave me an inheritance," he said. Harold replied softly, "No, he left you an exit strategy." The words settled heavily in the room. Ethan leaned back slightly. "From what?" Harold looked at him directly. "From something your family is too involved in to step away cleanly." Ethan felt the weight of that statement more than anything else so far. This wasn't just corporate manipulation. This wasn't just internal fraud. This was something structured, something long-term, something that required participation to survive. Ethan spoke slowly. "And Daniel," Harold answered honestly. "Daniel benefits from it." Ethan nodded once. "And Dad?" Another pause. "Your father manages the appearance of it." That was the final piece. Daniel equals execution, father equals protection, unknown structure equals control layer. Above both on Ethan. Ethan was the variable that didn't fit. Harold placed a hand on the table. "Arthur believed you wouldn't protect it blindly," he said. Ethan looked at him. "Protect what?" Harold exhaled slowly. "That's what you need to find out before they realize you already know too much." Ethan closed the file and stood up. Outside, night had fully taken over the city. The lights of Dallas stretched across the horizon like a quiet warning. As Ethan walked to his car, he noticed something unusual. A black vehicle parked across the street. Engine running. No visible driver movement. Just waiting. Ethan paused for half a second, then continued walking as if he hadn't noticed because now he understood something else. The moment you start looking too closely at systems built on silence, his system starts looking back. And somewhere inside that system, his family had already decided he was no longer just an inconvenience, it was a risk, and risks are handled differently. Ethan started the engine and drove off, but behind him, the black vehicle followed, slowly, quietly, not rushing, because it didn't need to. And for the first time since this entire chain of events began, Ethan realized the real conflict hadn't fully started yet. It was still preparing itself. Ethan noticed the black car only once. He had driven nearly 15 minutes out of downtown Dallas. At first, he told himself it was coincidence, traffic in a city like this often created illusions of pattern where none existed. But when he changed lanes, the same car followed. When he slowed down, it slowed down. When he took a turn toward a quieter industrial road, it adjusted without hesitation. That was no longer coincidence. Ethan didn't react immediately. Instead, he kept driving at a steady pace, his hands relaxed on the wheel, his expression unreadable. Years of working with structures, repairs, and systems had taught him something simple. You don't break a system by panicking, you observe it first. The road ahead grew darker as he left the main highway. Old warehouses lined both sides now, most of them shut down or repurposed for storage companies. He turned into one of them, a large empty logistics depot Harold had access to through old contracts. The gate opened automatically. Ethan drove inside and stopped his car near the center of the open yard. Then he waited. The black car stopped outside. The gate didn't enter, just stayed there, watching. Ethan exhaled slowly. Now, it was confirmed. This wasn't random attention. This was monitoring. Someone had already marked him, and they were not rushing because they didn't need information. They already had enough. They were waiting for him to make a mistake. Ethan stepped out of the car. The night air was cold against his face. He didn't look toward the gate. Instead, he walked toward the warehouse office, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Once inside, he pulled out his phone and called Harold. Harold answered almost immediately. "They're watching me," Ethan said calmly. A pause. Then Harold's voice tightened slightly. "Oh, yes." Another silence. Then Harold said something that changed the tone completely. "Then you're ahead of schedule." Ethan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Harold didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "It means Daniel is moving faster than expected." Ethan leaned against the desk inside the warehouse office. "What is he planning?" Harold exhaled. "A containment strategy." That word felt deliberate. Ethan repeated it slowly. "Containment." "Yes," Harold continued carefully. "When people like Daniel feel threatened, they don't always attack directly. They isolate the problem, cut off access, limit influence, control narrative." Ethan looked out through the office window. The black car was still there. "Meaning what exactly?" Ethan asked. Harold's voice lowered. "Meaning they will try to remove your ability to act before they challenge your authority." That was the real translation, not confrontation. Neutralization. Ethan straightened slightly. "Through what?" Harold paused again, then answered. "Finance first, reputation second, mobility third." Ethan nodded slowly. That matched what he had already seen. Account delays, internal reviews, quiet procedural friction, not attacks, obstructions, a system designed to slow him down, just enough to make him doubt his position. But there was something Harold hadn't said yet. Ethan could feel it. "What else?" he asked. Harold hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Daniel has reached out to Blackridge directly." That name again. Ethan's focus sharpened. "For what purpose?" Harold replied bluntly. "To stabilize leadership transition options." Ethan understood immediately. Not removal, replacement framing. They weren't just trying to block him. They were preparing a narrative where he was unnecessary, or unstable, or irrelevant. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Where is my father in all this?" he asked. A long pause. Harold answered carefully. "Your father is trying to keep it from becoming irreversible." That was interesting, because it confirmed something Ethan suspected. His father wasn't fully aligned with Daniel. He was balancing something. Control versus exposure, structure versus collapse. But balancing always fails when pressure increases. Ethan ended the call. He stayed inside the warehouse office for a while, looking at the dark yard outside. The black car was still there, but now another thought formed in his mind. If they were watching him, they already knew where he was going next, and that meant Harold might also be watched. The thought wasn't paranoia, it was logic. Ethan picked up his laptop and opened a secure connection. Then he accessed the Aspen Ridge Trust data again. This time, he focused not on Daniel, but on the external network, Blackridge Advisory Group. He traced every transaction again, but differently now, not by amount, not by date, by connection timing. And that's when he saw it, a pattern in approvals that matched specific board decisions inside Callaway Freight Holdings. Every major restructuring recommendation from Black had been preceded by internal stress signals inside the company, not random, not reactive, predictive. Ethan leaned forward slowly. That meant one thing. Blackridge wasn't just advising, it was embedded inside the decision flow, inside the structure itself. And if that was true, then someone inside Callaway was feeding them information in real time. Ethan whispered to himself, "So it's not just Daniel." A soft sound came from outside, a door closing. Ethan immediately shut the laptop and turned off the light inside the office. He moved silently to the window. The black car door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, dark coat, no visible identification. He didn't rush. He didn't look around like someone uncertain. He walked directly toward the warehouse gate. Ethan stayed still. The man stopped at the gate and looked. Inside, Nod searching randomly. Targeted. Ethan stepped back slightly into the shadow of the room. The man spoke into a device in his hand. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to, because the next moment, the man turned his head slightly and looked directly toward the office window. Even in darkness, even without direct light, he knew Ethan didn't move. The man stood there for a few seconds, then turned back and returned to the car. It drove away. Slowly, no urgency, no chase, just confirmation delivered. Ethan exhaled slowly. Now it was no longer surveillance, it was identification. He had been confirmed as a variable, worth tracking. That changed everything. The next morning, Ethan returned to the city. He didn't go home. He went directly to Harold's office. But when he arrived, something felt off immediately. The receptionist wasn't there. The door was slightly open. Ethan pushed it gently. Inside, papers were scattered across the desk. Harold's chair was empty. Ethan's pulse stayed steady, but his awareness sharpened instantly. He walked deeper inside. Laptop was still running, and on the screen was a single open file, a communication log. Recent entries. Ethan scanned. Quickly, his name appeared, then Harold's, then something else, a flagged instruction line. Monitor escalation subject. Limit external legal support. Ethan didn't need further explanation. He stepped back slowly. Harold wasn't just advising him. Harold had been under observation too, and now something had interrupted that observation. Either Harold had been moved or removed from the AU equation. Ethan closed the laptop carefully. This was no longer a family dispute, no longer inheritance tension, no longer corporate disagreement. This was containment execution, and he was now inside the containment perimeter. Ethan walked out of the office and stood in the hallway. For the first time since this began, he realized something important. They weren't reacting to his discoveries. They were reacting to the fact that he was discovering it all. And people who operate systems like this don't allow discovery to continue for long. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Rebecca. She answered quickly. "Where are you?" she asked immediately. Ethan didn't answer her question. "Has Dad spoken to you today?" A pause. "Yes," she said carefully. "Why? Is he calm?" Another hesitation. "No." That was all Ethan needed. "Then listen carefully," he said quietly. "This isn't about inheritance anymore." Rebecca's voice tightened slightly. "What do you mean?" Ethan looked out at the street outside the building. "I think Grandpa wasn't trying to give me something," he said. "He was trying to pull me out of something." A long silence followed. Then Rebecca whispered, "Out of what?" Ethan didn't answer immediately, because now, even he didn't have the full answer yet. But he understood the direction clearly. Whatever Blackridge was, whatever Callaway Freight Holdings had become, it wasn't just a business anymore. It was a structure designed to survive itself, and Ethan was now inside its blind spot. Ethan didn't move for a few seconds after ending the call with Rebecca. The silence around him felt heavier than usual, like the air itself had tightened. Harold's empty office kept replaying in his mind the scattered papers, the active laptop, the flagged instruction. Line monitor escalation. Subject limit external legal support. That wasn't just surveillance. That was containment protocol in action. Someone had already started controlling the flow around him, and now Harold was no longer reachable. Ethan stepped out of the building and walked toward his car, but instead of driving immediately, he sat inside for a moment, staring at the dashboard without turning the engine on. For the first time, the situation wasn't just expanding, it was closing in. Not loudly, not violently, quietly, systematically, like a net tightening slowly around something it had already identified. His phone rang again. This time, Daniel. Ethan answered. Daniel's voice came through immediately, sharp and controlled. We need to stop this before it goes further. Ethan stayed silent. Daniel continued. Whatever you think you've found, you don't understand the consequences of exposing it. Ethan finally spoke. You mean Blackridge? A pause. Then Daniel exhaled slightly. So you do understand more than I thought. That sentence confirmed something important. Daniel wasn't surprised. He was adjusting. Ethan leaned back in his seat. You've been working with him for a while, Ethan said calmly. Another pause. Then Daniel replied, working isn't the right word. That was enough. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. You built dependency, he said. Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, his tone shifted slightly. This started long before you were involved. Ethan opened his eyes. That doesn't make it right. Daniel's voice hardened. It makes it necessary. That word again. Necessary. Ethan had heard it too many times. Now from different people. In different contexts. Always used to justify control. Where is Harold? Ethan asked suddenly. Silence on the other end. Longer this time. Then Daniel answered carefully. I don't know. That answer didn't feel complete. Ethan responded immediately. You're lying. Daniel's voice sharpened. Ethan, listen to me. But Ethan interrupted. No, you listen. His tone changed slightly now. Not louder, just firmer. I'm not interested in protecting your system anymore. A pause. Then Daniel spoke slower. You think you're outside it. You're not. Ethan replied. I already stepped outside when Grandpa died. That line created a different kind of silence. Not tension. Recognition, Daniel finally said. You really don't know what he left you inside. Ethan ended the call without replying. Then he started the engine. He didn't drive home. He drove back to the Callaway estate, because now there was no point in delay. The system was already responding, and systems like this only reacted one way when pressured. They closed ranks. When Ethan arrived at the estate, the gates opened immediately. No hesitation, no delay. That alone felt intentional inside. The atmosphere was different again, not tense, controlled like someone had already prepared. For his arrival, Daniel was waiting in the main hall. But this time, Father was there too, and someone else, a third man, Ethan had never seen before. Well-dressed.com, postro-neutral, expression, but something about him didn't feel corporate. It felt procedural, like someone who didn't belong to the family, but to the structure behind it. Father spoke first. You shouldn't have come here today. Ethan looked at him directly. You called me here first. Father didn't respond. Daniel stepped forward slightly. We can resolve this without escalation. Ethan replied immediately. It's already escalated. The third man finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured. You're correct. Ethan turned his attention to him. And you are. The man didn't introduce himself directly. Instead, he said, I represent advisory oversight. That sentence meant nothing on the surface, but everything underneath. Ethan nodded slowly. Blackridge, a faint acknowledgement, not verbal, but present, the man continued. Your position within the trust creates operational instability. Ethan almost smiled. Operational instability, he repeated. Father spoke quickly. This is not a corporate negotiation. The man didn't look at Father. He kept his attention on Ethan. In practice, he said, it is. Daniel added, you're interfering with systems you don't fully see. Ethan looked at all three of them now, then said quietly, then show me. That request changed the atmosphere, because it wasn't emotional, it wasn't defensive, it was direct. The oversight man studied him for a moment, then replied, that is not how containment structures work. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Containment. The man nodded once. Ethan exhaled slowly. "So I'm not a beneficiary," he said. "I'm a risk factor." No one corrected him. That silence answered everything. Father finally spoke again, more quietly this time. Arthur understood what would happen if the structure lost balance. Ethan looked at him, and Father hesitated for the first time. He chose containment over disruption. Ethan understood immediately. Grandpa hadn't just divided inheritance, he'd inserted a controlled variable into a controlled system, and that variable was him. Ethan stepped forward slightly. "So I'm the pressure release point, the oversight," man replied calmly. "You are the monitored divergence." Daniel shook his head slightly. "This is why we asked you to step back." Ethan looked at him. "And give you control instead." Daniel didn't answer, because he didn't need to. Ethan turned slightly toward Father. "You knew about this." Father's jaw tightened slightly. "I knew enough." That wasn't denial. That was partial admission. Ethan stepped back slowly. Everything was clearer. Now, not fully, but enough. He wasn't just dealing with Daniel's ambition, or his father's control. He was inside something designed to prevent instability from spreading beyond defined limits. And Grandpa had placed him directly inside that system without warning them fully. That wasn't inheritance. That was insertion. The oversight man spoke again. "Your continued involvement requires adjustment." Ethan looked at him. "Adjustment, meaning what?" A pause. Then the man replied, "Restriction of access to financial authority." Daniel added quickly, "Temporary." Ethan turned back to him. "You think I'm going to accept that?" Daniel exhaled. "It's not a choice anymore." That sentence should have sounded like a threat, but instead, it sounded like confirmation of process. Ethan slowly nodded, then said something unexpected. "Where is Harold Vance?" Father looked away slightly. That was enough. Ethan's voice dropped. "Slightly, you removed him," the oversight man corrected calmly. "He was reassigned pending review." Ethan took another step back. Reassigned. That meant contained, controlled, removed from influence flow. The system wasn't reacting emotionally. It was reorganizing inputs. Ethan looked at all of them one by one, then spoke quietly. "Grandpa didn't build this to protect you." No one responded. "He built it to make sure it could be challenged." That sentence hung differently in the room. Daniel frowned slightly. "That doesn't make sense." Ethan looked at him. "It does if you understand him better than you do." The system. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on Daniel's face. Not fear, but disruption. Father stepped forward slightly. "This conversation is over." Ethan looked at him. "Not yet." The oversight man shifted slightly. A subtle movement, a signal. Ethan noticed and understood. Immediately, the system wasn't just observing anymore. It was preparing to isolate him from direct influence entirely. Not physically, structurally, and that meant one thing. His access to information would be the next thing to disappear. Ethan took a slow breath, then said quietly, "If you think removing people from the system stops what Grandpa started," he paused, "you don't understand what he actually built." And for the first time that evening, none of them replied immediately. Because somewhere deep inside the structure they controlled, they were starting to realize something uncomfortable. Grandpa. Arthur hadn't just inserted Ethan into the system. He had designed the system to eventually respond to him, and that meant this was no longer containment, it was transition. The room stayed silent after Ethan's last words, not the kind of silence that comes from confusion, the kind that comes from recalculation. Everyone inside that estate hall was trying to adjust their understanding of him in real time. Daniel broke. "At first, you keep talking like this is some kind of design," he said sharply. "Like Grandpa built a game around you." Ethan looked at him calmly. "Not around me," he replied. "Through me." That distinction changed Daniel's expression slightly. The oversight representative stepped forward again, voice still controlled. "Your interpretation is incomplete." Ethan nodded once, then completed for me. A pause, this time longer, because now every word mattered. Finally, the man spoke. Arthur Calloway anticipated structural corruption within internal leadership pathways. The trust mechanism was modified to introduce an external stabilizing variable capable of independent judgment. Ethan listened carefully. Daniel frowned. "What does that mean in normal terms?" Ethan answered instead. "It means Grandpa didn't trust any of you to fix the system once it started protecting itself." Father's face tightened. "That's not true." Ethan turned toward him. Then explain why Blackridge exists inside your company decisions. No answer, because there wasn't a clean one. The oversight man continued. Your presence was intended to ensure audit. Continuity without internal bias. Ethan exhaled slowly. So I was never meant to inherit normally. No, the man confirmed. You were meant to observe outcomes. Daniel stepped forward again, frustration breaking through now. This is ridiculous. You're acting like some kind of external judge. Ethan looked at him. No, he said quietly. I'm the part Grandpa left untouched. That sentence landed differently. Not dramatic, but final in tone. Father looked away for a moment, as if something uncomfortable had settled in his thoughts. Daniel, however, shook his head. This can still be resolved internally, he said quickly. We can restructure the trust, limit external involvement, keep things within the family. Ethan watched him carefully. Why? He asked. Daniel hesitated. Because instability damages everything we built. Ethan nodded slowly. There it is again. Daniel frowned. What? That word, Ethan said. Built. He stepped forward slightly. You didn't build it. Grandpa did. You maintained it. And somewhere along the way, you started believing maintenance was ownership. Silence again. The oversight man spoke quietly. Your continued resistance triggers escalation protocols. Ethan looked at him. What does that mean? A pause. Then the answer came. Full administrative transition proceedings. Father immediately reacted. No. Daniel turned sharply. You can't proceed with that. But the man didn't look at them. His attention remained on Ethan. Final authorization depends on confirmation of beneficiary intent. Ethan understood instantly. They weren't asking for permission from the family anymore. They were asking him. Because legally and structurally, he was now the deciding variable. Ethan looked at all three of them, then asked quietly, and if I refuse both sides? The room tightened, because that option hadn't been discussed. The oversight man answered carefully. Then the system defaults to freeze conditions until resolution. Ethan nodded slowly. So everything stops. Yes. Daniel exhaled sharply. That would destroy the company. Ethan replied calmly. No, he said. It would expose it. That sentence shifted everything again. Kiss exposure was the one outcome none of them wanted. Father finally spoke. Voice lower now. What do you want, Ethan? Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. I want the truth to stop being negotiable. Silence. Even Daniel didn't respond immediately, because that wasn't something you could argue against cleanly. The oversight man spoke again. Then a controlled disclosure framework must be established. Ethan nodded. That's fine. Daniel immediately stepped forward. You can't just expose everything. There are employees, families, operations, Ethan interrupted. I'm not exposing people. I'm exposing structure. The father looked at him carefully now. An offer. That. Ethan took a slow breath. After that, he said, everyone decides what they actually want to be part of. No one spoke, because that was the first time someone had framed it as a choice. Instead of a system, the oversight man steadied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Accepted. Daniel turned sharply. You can't agree to that. But the man continued. Controlled transition protocol will begin immediately. Father finally stepped forward. Ethan, for the first time. His voice didn't sound like authority. It sounded uncertain. Ethan looked at him. You built a world where control mattered more than clarity, he said quietly. Grandpa just made sure someone would eventually question it. Father didn't respond, because there was nothing to correct. Daniel looked between them now. Realization slowly replacing resistance. This isn't ending how you think it is, he said. Ethan looked at him. No, he replied. It's ending exactly how Grandpa planned. The oversight man stepped back slightly. Initial disclosure sequence will begin within 48 hours. Then he turned and left the room. No ceremony, no announcement, just exit. And with that, the structure around them began to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but officially. Father sat down slowly, like the weight of something long carried had finally shifted position. Daniel remained standing, but no longer spoke, because there was nothing left to negotiate. Ethan walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. Without turning back, he said, I didn't take anything from this family. Pause. Had to stop it from lying to itself. Then he left. 2 months later, Callaway Freight Holdings. was still operating, but not in the same form. Internal audits had become public disclosures. Blackridge advisory groups' influence was formally dissolved from decision chains. Several executives resigned. Others adapted. Father stepped back from leadership completely. Daniel retained a limited operational role, but under external oversight conditions, the system didn't collapse. It recalibrated. Ethan never took control of the company. He refused formal leadership entirely. Instead, he stayed outside the structure, as Grandpa Arthur originally intended, a stabilizing observer, not owner, not ruler, just a witness to truth. When systems tried to hide it again one evening, Ethan stood again at the ranch, where everything had started. The wind moved across the fields quietly, the same silence Grandpa used to sit in. Rebecca visited sometimes now. So did Daniel. Even Father came once, though they didn't speak much that day. Things didn't become perfect, but they became honest, and that was enough. Ethan placed Grandpa Arthur's letter back into the old wooden box and closed it. He looked out across the land and thought about everything that had changed. Power, family, control, truth, and then he understood something clearly. Real inheritance was never about money. It was about whether you continued a pattern or broke it. The wind moved gently across the ranch as Ethan stood there alone for a moment longer, not as an heir, not as a businessman, but as someone who finally understood the weight of seeing things clearly, even when others couldn't. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.